Hi there. Welcome to this week's addition to our podcast. This is the Logos Project with me, Dom Dalmaso, theology and philosophy major and content creator. This show aims at taking you back in time to understand prominent thinkers, writers, and cultures. We are semi-educated amateurs here at the Logos Project who constantly strive to deepen our knowledge of the history of human thinking. You're listening to the Logos Project with Dom Dalmaso, and in today's episode, I am joined by my friend Sam to introduce you to the concept of covenant.
All right, Dom, so what have you been reading lately?
The book I finished, I think it's been like 2-3 months since I finished it. It's Dr. Scott Hahn's, I think it's his doctoral thesis. I know it's basically what he described as his life's work. It's called Kinship by Covenant, and I learned so much from that book that I figured we'd talk about it.
Heck yeah. All right, so I'm going to pretend like I know already, but for the listeners.
Oh, wait, you don't? No.
What is a covenant?
Yeah, okay. A great question. So I'll throw it back at you. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think covenant?
I think of I guess a promise, or
exactly.
Like a deal, like a pact.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, we still have like language to this day that comes from these ideas that were prominent in the ancient Near East, which is like, you see this with kids, like, I'm gonna make a pinky promise.
Yeah.
And so what that means is that what they're saying, they're not gonna break that. They're gonna be faithful to their promise.
Or it costs you a whole pinky.
Pinky.
So you can only do that twice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, for example, one thing is like you often hear when people take an oath or like make a promise, they'll say something like, "Oh, I swear on my mother's grave." I don't know, like I promise her, or I'll go to hell or something. So basically, they're saying, "Look, if I'm unfaithful to this, the following curses are going to fall upon me." Like that, it binds them to that person or to that promise that they made, right?
Yeah.
So does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Okay. So think you're like a farmer in the ancient Near East, and like we're neighbors, and I got like my wife, or actually my wives, right? I got my slaves, I got my cattle, I got my land, I got my children, and you're my neighbor, and I'm like, oh, he's doing pretty good. Yeah, he's got some pretty good looking wives, and got a lot of slaves and cattle, a lot of land. So in the middle of the night, I'm gonna sneak over there and just slit your throat, take your wives, take your land, take your cattle, take your slaves. Now I've expanded. I've become more powerful.
Well, geez. That got real quick.
So, but, right, what would be even more advantageous is if I show up with, like, I don't know, some kind of gift. Wives made a bunch of food for you or something. And I'm like, hey, what's up, man? I see you're our neighbors, and why don't we make a deal? And he's like, okay. And so we make a pact, which is solemnized by what?
Promise?
Yeah, so like...
I didn't know if you were looking for something more specific. Or...
No, that's it.
Cool.
That's it.
Nailed it.
Yeah. So like basically, I don't show up to you and be like, yeah, let's make a deal. And you're like, yeah, okay. And then you walk off and I walk off. Like, nah, bro, we got to shake on it.
Yeah.
Right? There's like a sign that shows this is solemnizing this thing. It's sealing. It's a seal, right? So like, that's what the oath is. An oath is a solemn promise. And it's ritualized. That ritual makes it official. It makes it real. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so, like, that establishes something deeper than partnership. In the ancient Near East, all of the politics of the ancient Near East are formed after the understanding of the family. Nowadays, we live in a very legalistic kind of world where you have contracts, or like, for example, you take out a loan, or you sign a piece of paper, or you sign a lease or something like that. You're not becoming friends with the person you're signing the lease with, right? But you still owe them something, and they owe you something. Right?
Okay, so is this where the kinship comes in, right?
Yeah.
Kinship by covenant?
Yeah, exactly. So back then, when you made a pact, I mean, it had legal ramifications, right? But it was basically you saying, okay, now we're family. Your family is my family is your family. And so what they usually do after the pact is they'll sit down together and eat a meal.
My kind of pact.
Right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so like the idea being that, because like in the ancient Near East, meals it's a feast. It's a celebration of community, right?
Yeah.
Where you all share something, right? And when you share something, it's this idea of sharing yourselves at table, and it's a family ritual, really. Meals, and this is still the case in Europe. It also is in America, a bit less though. In America, it's we eat a lot faster. I think I could be wrong. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree. And like usually in front of the TV.
Yeah,
like
right.
A lot of families
right.
do. Yeah.
And I'm not saying they don't do that in Europe. They actually do a lot. Like there's a lot of people who stay home, like young bachelors, eat in front of the TV.
What do you know about Europe, Tom?
What do I know about Europe?
Yeah.
You're putting me on the spot. I grew up there.
Yeah.
So I do have some experience with that.
Yeah.
With the differences. We'll all eat together as a family. And it's a place where we can share conversation, share food, and it's a time of rest, basically, from the day.
I like that.
Yeah. So it's this idea of community, sharing, and relationship, right? And that's encompassed by the word kinship.
So how does that relate into the covenant piece again?
So the way that relates in covenant is when you make a covenant, you become family with the other person. And so what that means is that the way you show that you are now family is by eating a meal together.
Nothing more complicated than that?
No, that's it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So this is really cool because it gets into different types of covenant, right? So you have one type of covenant, which I'll just list the names and then we'll go ahead and break them down. Does that sound good?
Yeah, I like it.
So the first one we're going to talk about is the kinship covenant, which we kind of been talking about, right? So I'll just read here from Dr. Hahn's book, a definition of kinship covenant. The obligations of the covenant are more or less equally distributed between the two parties. In such a covenant, the parties are usually, but not always, themselves of equal status. Thus, this type of relationship is frequently called a parity covenant. So, what do you think is actually a really good example, even in modern times, of a kinship covenant?
Really any kind of sales transaction, right? Both parties are equal. Is that what you said?
So on that level, yeah. But do they become family?
No.
But what would be something today?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
A marriage.
Exactly.
Boom.
Yeah, marriage. So think about it. What do you do when you get married to someone?
You accept them as part of your family and accept their family as part of your family.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
You also have a ceremony, like you said.
Yeah, but what happens in the ceremony? What marries them? What do they do?
What do they do?
What do they?
They exchange vows.
Yes, vows.
Oh, bam. Yeah,
right?
I like that. Yeah.
Oath, vow, promise. Right. So and that
pretty charged word right there. Given
Yeah.
what we're talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the thing. Marriage has always been a covenant. And what's one of the famous sayings that a wife and a husband say to each other? We find this in
Till death do us part.
Yes, right. But we also find this in Hebrew literature.
You're yeah, right. But
no, that's true. Because there's this kind of you can't change a covenant.
Yeah.
So you're getting onto a very important aspect of covenants, which is you can't break it. You can't amend it, right? You can amend a will, but you can't change a covenant because it's a solemn oath, and if you do, you're going back on your word.
Mm-hmm.
But a will is different because you can change a will to make it apply to different circumstances and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So the thing about marriage, though, is that they become what? Both of them.
One, entity or body.
Yeah, exactly. We have one flesh.
One flesh.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was like.
Yeah. So, but that's covenant language. There's definitely instances where covenants are made between human parties.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
Which makes perfect sense,
Yeah.
right? But because a lot of times when people think of the Hebrew Scriptures, they think of the main covenant that God makes with Israel, which is true. It's what's important. It's the message of those books.
Absolutely.
But they're based off of human covenants. It's the way we envision the covenant with the supernatural is we use our human covenants as analogies to express that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and as we should, I think.
Yeah,
so. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's
love
the first kind.
Love me a good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah. so this is the second kind. The treaty covenant.
Treaty.
Okay, so here I'll just read what Dr. Hahn has to say. The obligations of the covenant are imposed on the inferior party by the superior. Scholars have often termed this arrangement a vassal treaty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Vassalage. Someone who's...
I don't know what a vassal is. Is that an element of feudalism?
Exactly. During the time of the Middle Ages, you were a vassal of the king.
I feel like I should cut out the part where I admitted that I didn't know what it meant.
I'm
just kidding.
No, you just said you knew what it was. So, another description is treaty type, right? So, which is what we just said, the treaty covenant, right?
Yeah.
So, scholars have often termed this arrangement a vassal treaty, vassal covenant, or treaty type covenant because the vassal treaties of the 7th century Assyrian emperor, I don't know how you say his name. I'm going to give it a shot, okay?
All right, yeah.
All right.
Throw the dice.
Asaradan.
Saradon.
Saradon. Okay.
I like how you say it with an accent too.
The Assyrian Emperor Saradon have been considered the paradigmatic examples of the form of that covenant, right?
So let's talk about specifically like what that means.
Yeah.
So
okay.
it's like
yeah, exactly.
So I immediately what came to my mind when you said that is like how kind of Rome treated, I don't know, everybody, that they conquered.
So maybe
where they like install a governor and it's like, hey, you're now part of Rome.
I don't know if that would be a covenant, but it's definitely some kind of legal arrangement, right? Like the Romans didn't mess with the Jews' traditions, for example, in the first century, right, or before that.
Well, yeah, I mean mostly.
Mostly, there was some zealots, what they called the zealots, which were Jewish rebels, hiding in the mountains to fight against the Romans, ambush them in guerrilla warfare. But I don't know. Like, I guess what I'm more thinking about is someone who, let's say, is part of the. He's like a slave to a master.
Okay, so he doesn't have. Yeah, he doesn't really have a say.
He doesn't really have a say, and the master's like, "Look, I'm gonna make a deal with you. You get to live in my house if you obey me in all things. The moment you disobey, I'm gonna mess you. I'm gonna punish you." Right? So it's very one-sided.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yeah. So yeah, that's pretty much what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, and that is what you were saying. I never thought of it in terms of like a power like Rome and say in a barbarian tribe. But in that case, it'd be, for example, the governor of Rome and like the leader of that tribe make a pact, make a contract.
Yeah, which is more or less
in that case, that would be a covenant. But so yeah. But like at the same time, is it ritualized? Like, is there an oath, and is there like a ceremony to ritualize it? So like, it could be covenantal attributes that are applied to the way things work. But is it a covenant per se? Like as
sure, I would argue like I don't know the word treaty in my mind has like this implication of like a formalized agreement between two like powers.
I think you're right. Yeah, I would agree with you. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know that. Slave ownership, I guess, is like formalized too. Maybe not in
when you buy
Assyria,
the slave, right? Well,
I don't know. I don't know if they had like paperwork on their slaves. Like I don't really know how that works.
Not paperwork, but they definitely had a means of like
property ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we have kinship covenant.
So kinship is between two equals. Treaty is like a master-slave relationship.
Okay.
And then finally you have the grant covenant, which this one is going to be super important.
I thought you said there was 4.
There's 3.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So this one's the grant covenant. Let's see. You don't want to read this.
Like Ulysses, of course, right?
Ulysses? What?
Sorry. I forgot you're European. Ulysses Grant?
Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, yeah.
All right, yeah, might be.
All right, so the grant covenant. So the obligations of the covenant rest predominantly with the superior party.
Say that one more time.
The obligations of the covenant rest predominantly with the superior party. So let me continue. It'll make more sense.
Okay, yeah.
Who freely accepts responsibilities towards the inferior, usually in response to the inferior's faithfulness or other meritorious qualities. So I'll give you an example. Well, go ahead.
Well, so when I think of like covenant, right, and we were talking about the implications of Christ and his church, I feel like kinship made a lot of sense, right?
Yeah,
in that respect.
And it is.
But now you just described grant covenant, which seems almost more fitting.
That's the thing. Like,
I guess that depends on whether or not you're Christian.
Well, right. Well, like, see, when we get into like the history of Christianity, which we can do like a whole separate podcast on that. But it's interesting because it incorporates several aspects of different types of covenants.
Okay.
And that's a whole different topic, which is really fascinating. But I guess like and covenants overlap. Like they'll have qualities from this type and this type. It's not black and white, but these are like the 3 main categories that show up on average. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like it.
Like we're never dealing in black and whites with this kind of stuff. But yeah, so grant covenant. So for example, let's say I'm like the citizen of this feudal town during the feudal system in the Middle Ages. Let's say there's enemies trying to take over the castle and strike down the lord of that castle. And like through my exploits, I basically show my solidarity and my reverence and my faithfulness, my fidelity towards the Lord, and I find a way to kill the leading opponent, right?
Cool.
And because of what I did, right, because of that showed my allegiance towards my Lord, he makes a promise. He's obviously superior to me. I'm just this little peasant. But I did something great and I saved the day out of faithfulness to him. And he says, okay, so since you did that, I make you a promise that you will always have this amount of land. Or I make you a promise that your house will become a renowned noble house from now on. Right? He's going to elevate his status or something. And so when the superior makes that promise, he's beholden by it. Because it's an oath. You can't go back on that.
Yep.
Right? So yeah, so that's basically what a grant covenant is. And grant is like granted, right? It's gift. It's given from on high, from the Lord to the peasants.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, and it's different from the slave and the master, because in that case, it's the slave promising the master that he will do these things, right? But here it's the Lord promising the servant that he will do these things. See the difference?
But, so the grant covenant, you said the implication there is faithfulness.
Yeah, so the faithfulness is what initiates it for sure.
So is there any, like, you also said a covenant can't be changed.
Yes.
Right? So what if that faithfulness, like,
is broken?
Yeah, or
That's
degrades.
A good question. Exactly. So and that's what we're dealing with. So if that faithfulness degrades, right, the king or the Lord, right, is still beholden to his promise because he made a vow. That will not change. However, what we often see is he'll grant the vow to the offspring of the person who became unfaithful, or he will withhold promises of his vow, but never cancel them.
So this makes me think of like Moses, right?
Well, that's the point.
Yeah. So nice.
Yeah. So, and we'll get into all that, right? So, but the interesting thing is that this idea of covenant, it's not just in the Hebrew scriptures. It shows up in Homer, slightly differently. In Homer, they call it more like a oath sacrifice, which is
oath sacrifice.
Yeah, which is like when you slaughter animals in honor of the gods, hoping they will protect you. Right? They're asking for a pledge from the gods to protect them, right?
Mm.
So you have this in Homer. You have it also in like Babylonian literature. You have it in Egyptian literature. It's all throughout the ancient Near East. It's not just the Hebrews.
Dude, we should do one about sacrifice. I think that'd be really
that would be awesome. Yeah, definitely.
I got opinions on that one.
Oh, I'd love to hear them.
Cool. Yeah, we'll another time.
Yeah. So this is awesome. Okay, so I want to start with that. Okay, because we have we could go on for hours here. So what are the components? I'm gonna throw this back at you now to see if you're tracking with me. What are the components of a covenant?
So you mean specifically things that we just talked about?
Yeah, like, so what makes up a covenant based on everything we just talked about?
Yeah, so there needs to be a promise.
Yes.
Some kind of like formalized agreement.
Yes.
And then some kind of like, maybe ceremony is not the right word, but we'll say ceremony of like tying the knot.
Yeah.
I guess what kind of marriage implications there the way I said that, but
that's the cool thing.
Or like sometimes it's a meal, sometimes it's
that's what the consummation
ceremony.
Of marriage means, right? Because you're consuming your oath and you are becoming one flesh.
Yep.
You can't. It's not complete until you become one flesh, right? So what's interesting? So also another way you can put it is that you always need at least two parties, right? Which is obvious, right? Duh.
Yeah, makes sense.
You can't like make a covenant to yourself. I mean, I guess you could. I never thought of that.
I never hold those covenants.
Yeah. Yeah. So you always need two parties, and the promise or oath. I like the word oath because we'll see later why, but I'll explain. What are you doing?
Almost choked.
Yeah. So we'll see later why I like the word oath. I don't want to say anything yet. I want to leave it as like a surprise.
Dun 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 dun.
Yeah, exactly.
Tune in next week for. Just kidding.
So two parties, an oath, and so I guess what I was kind of getting at, but I wasn't very clear with this, so I'm gonna throw out on the table now, is you have curses and blessings, right? So we have two parties, an oath, which is ritualized, and then curses and blessings. What do you think the curses are for and the blessings are for?
So I would argue you're either faithful to that oath or you're not,
Yeah.
right? And then there's an implied either curse or blessing.
Exactly. So let's say I break my oath. I swore that I would keep this promise, or if not, I'll go to hell, for example. Then you are basically
seems like pretty high stakes,
right? So like, I mean, that don't make oaths like that. I would suggest.
Quality piece of life advice right there.
that means that now you're under a curse, and you're going to be damned. Like I'm not saying this is like literally true. It's an analogy. It's just a way of speaking.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But
is that what an analogy is? I'm just kidding.
So basically, like you're screwed unless there's a way for you to pay that debt, and there's no way for you to pay that debt. You can't pay it. You're screwed.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
So, okay, but let's say you're faithful. What happens? Well, you're blessed. So what that means is because of your faithfulness, good things happen to you. For example, you have a now strong, healthy friendship because you kept your promise. And guess what? You get a good name, right? A good, not fame, but what's the word I'm looking for?
Reputation.
Reputation.
Yeah.
You get a good reputation because you're someone who keeps his promises and you're a faithful friend.
Let your yeses mean yes, right?
Yeah. And so what happens is you actually experience blessings from your faithfulness, right? But when you are unfaithful, you experience curses, right? So, and this is a kind of interesting way to look at life in general, right? You know, when you commit to something or when you promise something or when you tell someone something, you know, it's like you're saying, let your yes be yes or your no be no. And then the consequences of that is either positive or negative. So curses and blessings, that's going to come up a lot, especially in the ancient Near Eastern literature. So, okay, that's covenant. Should we apply this or should we stop here and...
No, yeah, let's apply it. Let's see what you got, yeah.
Okay, let's look at some texts, for example. But think of this as a lens, and like, you know how like sometimes you need sunglasses because it's bright out? And then you can see better.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's really dark, so like you'll put like MVGs on.
Raw.
Yeah. The lens of covenant will help you see what's actually going on in the text. Does that make sense?
Nice. Let's look at. Do you have like a favorite example of this? And then we'll wrap it up.
I do. It's kind of a controversial one.
Ooh.
So,
I think I know where you're going with this. Are you talking about the Galatians?
No.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
No, I'm talking about Genesis 22.
Oh, okay.
The binding of Isaac.
Yeah.
Controversial because it seems to be like human sacrifice.
It is. Yeah.
Which is a great discussion that we can have, right? So we've laid down the ground for you to understand what a covenant is.
Let's talk about it, and then we won't hit on the implications of like human sacrifice.
Yeah.
Quote unquote.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and apply this, right? So chapter 22 of the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Hebrew scriptures, you know. Genesis means
fair, yeah, the beginning.
The beginning, right?
In the beginning.
The origin, or yeah. Okay. Or the firstborn.
As narrated by
Dom also. So
who's a really famous black dude?
Who?
No, the guy who always plays God. Morgan Freeman.
Oh yeah.
As narrated by Morgan Freeman. That was a terrible impersonation. Absolutely terrible.
I didn't think it was that bad.
Thanks, man.
Okay. So 10. Then Abraham put forth his hand and took the knife to slay his son. Oh God.
Oh Lord.
But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. He said, Do not lay your hand on the lad or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only begotten son, from me. All right. What do we see here? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Faithfulness.
Yeah. So you're already tracking, I can tell. So what does Abraham do?
Well, I hope so.
No, like what you
he's
said.
He's being faithful. Yeah, he is.
So he's showing his
doing what he's told.
To who?
Yeah, to the Lord.
To the Lord. What does that remind you
of? Covenant. I don't know.
Yeah, but like the different kinds, remember?
Oh yeah. Which kind? That's definitely the feudal one. God.
Yeah, the grant kind.
Grant. All right, ask me that one more time.
So, the faithfulness of the subject towards the Lord.
Wait, so ask me you're like, what does that remind you of?
Yeah, what does that remind you?
You mean like what type of covenant?
Yeah.
Grant covenant?
Yeah.
Oh, this is shameless. I lost my notes.
All right. So, okay.
Grant covenant.
Oh,
Grant covenant. Grant covenant. Ulysses. Grant covenant.
Ulysses Grant.
Killed it.
Okay. So, and Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said to this place, On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. All right, now this is where it gets good. Ready?
Oh, I'm ready.
And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this, and have not withheld your son, your only begotten son, I will indeed bless you.
Boom.
And I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies, and by your descendants shall all the nations of the earth bless themselves, because you have obeyed my voice. So, we're obviously seeing a grant covenant here.
Obviously.
We have the faithfulness of Abraham, and then there's a ritual where he offers the ram.
Yep.
And God makes what? An oath. He swears.
Yep.
Right? And he swears faithfulness back to Abraham.
Yep. And right? Even implies blessings.
Blessing because of his faithfulness. Right? Yeah.
Wow, Dom. Wow.
So that's applying covenant to that small bit of text. But when it gets really good is when you start applying this to the whole narrative.
Well, so on that point, you called it a lens of the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
So is your argument that covenant was such a pivotal piece of how the ancient Near East operated?
Functioned, yeah, as a people.
Contracts are obviously a huge piece of...
So the thing I don't like about contracts is that they're actually kind of a flattening of the covenant. In the sense
where... so you're taking out like the personality,
you're
like
taking out the
kinship.
Exactly. It becomes just a contract, right? And guess what marriage is today?
Just a contract.
Boom.
We're being in the military, definitely see that all the time. Yeah.
Right? And so that's what I'm saying. But this flattening of the concept, which is a very deep concept of covenants, is becoming a trend in the modern world. Now we could talk about how that developed. That would be fascinating right there.
That actually is fascinating.
Yeah.
That's a huge I guess push for like modern society is to pull almost what makes things sacred out of specific institutions.
Yes. Here's a word for you we can unpack. It seems to me that the problem with today's view on contracts as well as on relationships is It's a kind of a jargony word. You ready? Ontological flattening.
Ontological flattening.
Right. So, and this is where we can get into Greek philosophy, which would be fascinating too. But in Greek philosophy, you have the four causes, which give depth to what something is in its being, what something actually is,
and why it is.
Yeah, why it is, what it's for, and where it came from. Right. Those are the four causes.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about that is that if you take away what it's for and what it is, all you have is what something came from and what it's made of, without a substance to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a flattening. Ontology means of being, right? Ontological, ologia is the study of, and ontos, well, it's from the Greek, is being itself. So the study of being, right? Which is what metaphysics is. But that's a whole different podcast right there. But ontological flattening basically means where this idea of you're taking things in the world and you're reducing them to just what they look like on the surface, and you're not giving them the depth of being that used to be given to them by the ancients. So we have this interesting shift in the way we think about the world. Covenant becomes contract, right? And the four causes become just two.
Yep.
Right? And so that would be fascinating to talk about.
Dude,
I know you've been doing some reading on that too.
I have, and I'm pretty excited to divulge.
Yes.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we should wrap this up.
Yeah, agreed. And then next time we could look at a different text with covenants, or we could explore the idea of Melchizedek, which is a fascinating topic right there.
Does that apply to covenant?
We can tie it in. Yeah, we can tie it in. It is not directly.
It is the lens through which you.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Fair enough. All right.
So I think we're good for today.
Cool. We'll sort that out.
Okay.
Team, we'll see you guys later.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Don't forget, you can leave a review with this podcast. It helps others to discover it. Thanks to those who support us. You make this project possible. We appreciate it. If you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/thelogosproject, LOGOS project. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week.